Hey folks, welcome back. Man, it's so good to see everybody again. I haven't made a video since last year.
Silent Hill, you know what I'm saying? Everyone loves the PlayStation game, including me, especially me. But we've already been down that road once, right? Everybody loves my Silent Hill video, critically acclaimed. What's one dislike anyway? Who cares? I don't even care.
But in the interest of providing context, in case you're that one guy who disliked my video, let's go over the cliff notes, shall we?
Capcom releases Resident Evil and everyone says, scary, but good scary. Konami decides, shit, we need to make one of those. So they decide that the ideal way to go about this is to take a bunch of low-ranking employees and treat them like prisoners of war for a few years. I mean, look, don't treat your workers like that, but clearly something worked out here because it resulted in the greatest psychological horror game to date. So yeah, Harry Mason finds himself in Silent Hill, a very foggy, small town full of monsters. His daughter's gone, there's a cult, yada yada, who cares? Well, actually, lots of people cared, because 2 years later, bam, Silent Hill 2, baby! Very similar to the first game, but clearly the face has been rotated 90 degrees, and now the cover is green. Nice. Silent Hill 2 was, of course, developed by Team Silent, a group of abuse victims being held captive within Konami Computer Entertainment Tokyo. Unlike the first game, the plot of which was devised by Keiichiro Toyama, Silent Hill 2 was largely the brainchild of Takayoshi Sato. You know, the guy who lived in his office for 2.5 years creating all the full-motion video cutscenes for the game at threat of his work not being credited.
And you thought your job at Dairy Queen was hard. Okay, being a game designer is probably more fun than working at Dairy Queen. Sorry.
Despite Takayoshi Sato spearheading the writing, Hiroyuki Owaku reprised his role of the other guy who writes. Now, Silent Hill 2 is considered by critics and fans to be one of the greatest games ever made, but I think it's fair to say that the most widely acclaimed aspect of this game is the story, and for good reason. I would go so far as to say that Silent Hill 2 has the best plot of any video game ever. I was pleasantly surprised to find that Takayoshi Sato based the story on Fyodor Dostoevsky's classic novel, Crime and Punishment.
Now I know what you're thinking. Ben, you can't read. And you're right. Books give me indigestion. But I will have you know that Crime and Punishment is one of my favorite books of all time. And by that I mean I've read 9 pages of it, which is like 6 more pages than I've read of any other book.
And of course we got all our other homies from Team Silent reprising their roles. Akihiro Imamura worked as producer, everyone's favorite guy Akira Yamaoka did the music and sound design, and Masahiro Ito was responsible for the monster designs. One thing that makes a lot of sense in retrospect is the fact that Ito took influence from manga author Junji Ito, likely best known for his series Uzumaki, which is one of my favorite mangas ever made.
Now I hear your complaints. Enough ass-kissing the guys from Team Silent. Just get to the f***ing game. And I agree. Let's slam that shit right in and get right on to Silent Hill 2. And you know, obviously this is gonna have spoilers for Silent Hill 2, so... get out of here.
Silent Hill 2 opens with the iconic shot of our protagonist, James Sunderland, looking at himself in a dirty mirror in a gross bathroom. The shot is accompanied by one of Akira Yamaoka's best tracks, White Noise. The song is so beautiful and atmospheric, but also creepy. It's the perfect track to accompany the opening of this experience. James walks out of the bathroom and we learn that the reason he's come to Silent Hill is because he received a letter from his wife Mary, who died 3 years prior from a nondescript disease. James runs into a graveyard where he meets a girl named Angela, who says she's looking for her mother, but she seems as confused as to where she is or what's going on as James is. After doing a little dicking around in Silent Hill, we arrive at the Woodside Apartments, the first main area of the game. One thing that actually does kind of piss me off about Silent Hill games is the fact that you're always made to explore areas with hundreds of doors, and usually like 80% of them are inaccessible. You approach it and it says the lock is broken, which basically translates to there's nothing back there. So basically this means that if you're not using a walkthrough, you're going to find yourself walking up to every single door and trying to use it to see if there's something back there. Thankfully, if the door doesn't work, it gets marked on your map, but I don't understand why they wouldn't just board up the door if there's nothing behind it. Look at Evil Within. It's very clearly indicated that you can't go through this door. Hell, even this game has some doors that are boarded up, so why not just board up all the doors that have nothing behind them?
But that's simply one minor criticism. Don't get all upset with me here. This is still one of my favorite video games of all time, so don't cherry pick this one little gripe and be like, he hates this game! Idiot Ben says throw Silent Hill 2 in the garbage! Or should I say, don't cherry pick this one little grape. It's like a fruit joke.
One trope of the Silent Hill series that I really like that began in this game is the fact that James turns his head and fixates on items sitting around. It's a good way of indicating to the player that there's an item they can pick up without being too transparent about it. Obviously, it would kind of kill the immersion if the items were, like, brightly outlined or whatever. But at the same time, like, you can't expect people to be able to see items in this. Like, I can't see a foot in front of me. Anyway, lots of wacky stuff happens in this apartment building. We're introduced to 3 new characters here: Eddie, Laura, and everyone's favorite, Pyramid Head. Well, we don't exactly meet Laura yet. She just steps on James' hand and kicks away a key he's trying to reach. We do, however, meet Eddie, a fat dude who, between vomiting, insists that he didn't kill anyone despite James not asking him.
Sounds like something someone who killed someone would say.
Much like Angela, who we met in the graveyard, Eddie seems like he's not entirely sure why he's in Silent Hill, and James says that maybe something called him to the town. We also see Angela again in one of the most emotionally provoking scenes in the game. Set to Akira Yamaoka's beautiful track, Promise, James finds Angela lying on her side in a room with a giant mirror wall. In her hand she has a bloody knife, and James assumes that she's attempting to kill herself, so he stops her. She's missing more than a few screws though. She's got this vague goal of finding her mother, but she doesn't seem as though she's entirely sure what's going on at all. Like, she asks James to hold the knife, but when he reaches for it, she gets scared and holds it toward him in self-defense. She's clearly very damaged, and she exhibits a lot of fear toward men. After a fight with Pyramid Head, James exits out the back of the apartment buildings and encounters Laura sitting on a wall. Laura reveals that she knows who Mary is, and accuses James of not loving her before running off. She's very clearly not a fan of James. James heads to Rosewater Park, where he's convinced he'll find Mary. And he's not entirely wrong. He doesn't find Mary, but he finds Maria, who looks and sounds exactly like Mary, but she's like sexier, you know?
Now, if you've seen a few of my videos, I'm sure you know how this goes. I'm not gonna summarize the whole game, you know? This isn't a walkthrough, it's something else. Like, honestly, do you want to watch me be like, and then James went to the hospital and it was scary, and then he left because it was scary, and then he went to the prison and it was scary, and then after that he went to... Is that what you want? Because if it is, I can make a video like that. No, Silent Hill is a very David Lynch looking ass symbolic experience where everything means something, so I kind of want to go into the symbolism of the game. Unfortunately, that means, you know, spoilers, so if you don't want any of that, get out of here. So help me God.
Before I do any kind of analysis, I want to talk about some of the reasons I love this game so much. Nakey Jakey said it first, but this game is fucking beautiful. In my opinion, there is just nothing that matches the atmosphere of Silent Hill 2. Akira Yamaoka's range of music is just staggering. It goes from beautiful and toned down and slow and atmospheric to loud and frightening and stressful. Silent Hill 2 has one of the best soundtracks in any game. I think it's probably his best work. Another thing that I love about Silent Hill 2 is just how creepy it is. Now look, I consume so much horror media that I'm numb to it at this point. Like, it's so hard to find something that genuinely creeps me out. Silent Hill is one of the few things that manages to do that sometimes. There's a few moments in this game that gave me a real genuine spooking. In particular is Pyramid Head standing at the end of that hallway just looking at you. There's this creepy whispering noise that happens in one of the rooms in the apartment buildings that doesn't even necessarily show up. There's a good chance that you could play this game multiple times and never hear it. And I mean, sure, you know, people looked into it and it was just stock noises, which is disappointing. But it's horrifying when you first hear it. Like, it sends a shiver up your spine. It's genuinely creepy. Probably the creepiest thing about this game that I didn't even notice until my most recent playthrough is the prisoner in the one line of cell blocks that you can't see. But he just makes noises at you. He talks to you, but it's not human. You can't understand what he says, but it's just bone chilling. It's so unbelievably creepy. Like, I don't remember the last time I played a game and I was like, The last area we go to in the game is the Lakeview Hotel, a special place in James and Mary's relationship because they stayed there several times before she was hospitalized with her illness. James finds a videotape in the hotel that Mary/Maria mentioned earlier in the game, and when he plays it in the room they stayed in together, it reveals the big twist of the game. Mary was in the hospital with an illness, and she did die, but she didn't die of the illness. James murdered her. He smothered her to death. And he didn't do it out of some, like, put me out of my misery, I can't stand to see you like this motivation. No, he killed her because he wanted his life back.
If you haven't picked this up already, James is an asshole. Unlike a normal person who would, you know, feel bad for someone who is dying of an illness and be supportive, James more so feels bad for himself. He sees this disease more of like a burden on his own life, you know? Mary isn't in his house, they can't live normally together anymore, and seemingly most importantly, they can't have sex anymore. Husband of the decade, for sure. So yeah, there you go. That's the big twist. I really wish I didn't have to reveal it, but the whole game pretty much revolves around the fact that James killed Mary.
Up until this moment, it's reasonable to feel bad for James. You probably think he's like Harry Mason from Silent Hill 1, just a poor son of a bitch in the wrong place at the wrong time. But this moment where James watches this videotape and realizes what he did puts every puzzle piece together. Everything that has happened in this game is a direct result of James' unspeakable crime.
So let's think about this. The physical appearance of Silent Hill manifests itself based on the psyche of a certain person. In Silent Hill 1, the town is based on Alessa, Dahlia Gillespie's daughter, who was involved in a ritual to birth a demon, and she was severely injured as a result. That's why Harry goes to an elementary school, a hospital, and a theme park. Kid-centric places, and then obviously also the hospital because she was severely injured during the ritual. I think the reason I love Silent Hill 2 so much is because you're actually playing as the character who's influencing the physical appearance of Silent Hill. Now put on your thinking shoes, because I'm about to talk about a whole bunch of symbolic stuff, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Obviously, I'm not trying to say original theory, do not steal. There's obviously going to be overlap from other people on the internet who have talked about this game. These are just what I've gotten through my 4 playthroughs of the game. If you think I'm wrong, feel free to tell me. You are always welcome to call me a dumbass.
Like I said, in this game, Silent Hill manifests itself based on James. But what about the other characters? What's their deal? James encounters 5 different characters in his little vacation in Silent Hill. Angela, Eddie, Laura, Maria, and Pyramid Head. Are they here in the same way James is? Like, were they called to Silent Hill because they've done something immoral? Or are they there to serve the purpose of punishing James? And if so, are they even real? Well, let's think about Angela and Eddie first. Angela comes from an abusive home. Her father and brother physically and sexually abused her throughout her life, leading to a breaking point wherein she stabbed her father in the neck, killing him. When James encounters Angela in the apartment, she's lying on the floor holding a bloody kitchen knife. It's obvious that she has suicidal tendencies, which is understandable given her circumstances. But once you know her backstory, I think it seems kind of obvious that the knife she's holding doesn't have her blood on it, but rather her father's. I know that it's confirmed that Angela is in Silent Hill because she's committed the sin of murder, but I always sort of saw her as an example to show James the effect that abuse has on women. Not to suggest that James sexually abused Mary, but he did emotionally abuse her through neglect and resentment. I don't really see how you could think that Angela is deserving of punishment. Like, sure, she killed her father, but I mean, can you blame her? On the other hand is Eddie, who's been bullied his whole life, and eventually snaps and kills one of his bully's dogs. Eventually, as the game goes on, Eddie becomes more and more desensitized to murder and eventually begins killing people who make fun of him. Obviously, he's not as sympathetic as Angela, but at the very least, he has a motivation that makes sense to a certain extent. In a way, Eddie and Angela have a lot in common. They've both been emotionally stunted due to their terrible upbringings and were both driven to commit murder. Like James, they've been called to Silent Hill, but I think they're both much more easily sympathized with than James. You know, Angela vastly more than Eddie. Eddie's still a douchebag, but still.
But Ben, what about the other characters? God, will you be patient? I'm getting to it.
So yeah, Eddie and Angela are similar, but there are 3 other characters I mentioned. Laura, Maria, and Pyramid Head. Laura is her own thing entirely. I think that she's worth explaining on her own. But Maria and Pyramid Head actually have a lot in common.
But I'm sure I didn't need to tell you that. I mean, look at these 2. They're like twins.
One of the biggest themes of Silent Hill 2 is sexuality, particularly James's sexuality.
Gross.
In the later stages of Mary's illness, she began to deteriorate physically, leading not only to a negative effect on their sex life, but also James no longer being sexually attracted to Mary. Obviously, as a result of this, James developed a lot of sexual desires, and I don't think it would be a far stretch to say that he may have engaged in some extramarital affairs with other women. James' sexual desires are repeatedly referenced through symbolism in the game. Pretty much all the monsters in the game have sexual undertones. They all have feminine body types. Particularly interesting, in my opinion, are the nurse monsters, which imply that James had a number of sexual feelings toward the nurses at the hospital where Mary was staying. So what does this have to do with Maria and Pyramid Head? Well, everything, you fucking idiot. Let's start with Maria. I said this before, but Maria is a woman that James meets who looks and sounds identical to Mary, aside from her clothes and her hair. She behaves differently from Mary as well. She's very flirty and sexually suggestive. It's probably obvious, but Maria is like a sexually ideal version of Mary in James' eyes. I think it's worth pointing out that the name Mary is obviously most closely associated with the Virgin Mary, who's generally seen to be the image of purity and innocence. And while Maria is the pronunciation of Mary in other European languages, from an English language perspective, Maria doesn't have the same association. And then we got good old Pyramid Head.
Hell yeah, Triangle Man.
Everybody loves Pyramid Head. This stupid motherfucker has basically become the mascot for Silent Hill. And the fact that he's been plastered everywhere really goes to show how little of a shit Konami gives about maintaining the artistic integrity of the Silent Hill franchise. This character only makes sense in the context of James Sunderland. He exists as a representation of James' desire to be punished for his actions. Masahiro Ito himself has gone on record criticizing Konami for bringing Pyramid Head back in later installments, because he said that the character was specifically designed for James Sunderland. But anyway, enough complaining. The reason I compared Maria and Pyramid Head is because, unlike Eddie and Angela, they aren't real people. They're both constructs made up in James' head. They also both sort of exist to serve a joint purpose. Maria represents James' selfish desires, and Pyramid Head exists to make him remember that he killed his wife, and to punish him for it. Over the course of the game, Pyramid Head repeatedly kills and reincarnates Maria in front of James, as a way to make him come to terms with the fact that he killed Mary. In my opinion, the most effective Pyramid Head kills Maria scene is the first time he does it. James and Maria are being chased down a long, turning hallway with an elevator at the end, and James manages to make it to the elevator, but Maria is stuck outside and ultimately gets killed by Pyramid Head. In my opinion, James rushing into the elevator first and leaving Maria outside, even though he did try to pry the doors open, mirrors how he put his own well-being in front of Mary's when he killed her to, quote, get his life back. The last character we're going to talk about is Laura. Laura is a little girl who James sees throughout the town, and she just absolutely hates him. We learn later on that Laura was staying at the same hospital as Mary, and developed a strong relationship with her. Mary says that she had intended to adopt Laura when she got better. Thanks a lot, James, that ain't gonna happen anymore. And of course, Laura hates James because she's able to see from an objective view that James hardly visits Mary and is emotionally distant when he is there. The reason I think of Laura as her own sort of category is because she doesn't fit in with the other characters. She's not a manifestation made up in James' mind like Pyramid Head or Maria. She's a real person, but unlike Eddie or Angela, she wasn't brought to Silent Hill to atone for some sin. Like, what could an 8-year-old possibly do to deserve getting slam dunked into Hell World? So in that case, what's the little girl doing in Silent Hill all alone? Well, late in the game it's revealed that Mary left Laura a note saying she's, quote, far away now. Obviously, Mary means she's in heaven, because she's dead. But kids are fucking idiots, so Laura assumes that she means she's still alive and just somewhere far away. So she travels to Silent Hill to look for her. To be honest, I was kind of confused by Laura at first. Why is she here? Isn't she scared? Lots of monsters looking around for a little girl to be all alone. But it turns out that the developers said that the monsters only appear to people who have darkness in their hearts, which is why James, Eddie, and Angela can see them, while Laura is completely oblivious to the nightmarish true nature of Silent Hill. One of the major reasons that Laura is important to James is the fact that she's how he learns that Mary didn't die 3 years ago, but rather very recently, because in her letter to Laura, Mary says, "Happy 8th birthday," and Laura tells James that she turned 8 only a week prior.
So yeah, that's a whole whack about the symbolism of Silent Hill 2. And I'm really just scratching the surface here. There's so much to this game, even more than all the stuff I mentioned. You could easily make a video about every individual character, and even still you'd probably have a lot of stuff to talk about outside of that. And you know what, maybe I'll make another video about Silent Hill 2 sometime, because it's one of my favorite video games of all time. I don't want to say definitive favorite, because I'm an indecisive piece of garbage, but I will go so far as to say that, in my opinion, it's the best horror video game ever made. I give Silent Hill 2 a better than the first one.